Welcome to diplomacyindia.com. I am VN Jha and this is our special program Envoy Speaks Face to Face with the Envoy. Today we had our special guest, His Excellency Oscar Martinez, Ambassador of Cuba with us. So now we are going to have a detailed discussion regarding India-Cuba relations. So welcome Mr. Ambassador, welcome Mr. Martinez to our program. The first thing we would like to know is, against the backdrop of a special affinity between India and Cuba dating back to Nehru, Fidel Castro, NAM, how do you describe the present state of bilateral relations?
Yes, first of all, I want to thank you for the opportunity for this interview and to talk about Cuba and India relations. Our relations are based in historical. Our relation is based in our historical commitment with India. I would say that almost 12 years after the independence from India in 1947, triumphed the Cuban Revolution in 1959. And since the beginning, we, the Cubans, began to struggle for our independence against neocolonialism, for our self-determination. And that was a big reason why many Cubans' leadership rise over the third world countries. They went to Africa, but they went also to Asia, to Bandung conference. And I remember that in 1959, the first Cuban, rebel Cuban, that went to this part of the world was Comandante Ernesto Che Guevara. He was sent by Fidel to India. And in that time, he met President Nehru. Prime Minister Nehru. And since the beginning, there was an identification of political sense between the Cuban leaders and the Indian leaders at that time. So I think that is the base, the political base of our relation that are identified also by the practice of the fundamental of non-aligned movement in that time. So that is the issue of that relation that in 1960 brought the establishment of the diplomatic relation, where India opened an embassy in Havana. And after that, there were some interesting issues. For example, in 1960, when Fidel Castro led the Cuban delegation to a General Assembly in the United Nations in New York, he wanted to go to a 5-star hotel, and it was not permitted. So Fidel said to the General Secretary of United Nations, if they don't let me go to a 5-star hotel, I will build my tent here in the United Nations building. And that was the owner of Hotel Teresa in Harlem, a black neighbor place where the owner of that hotel invited Fidel to go to this hotel. And the first international politician that came to meet Fidel in that hotel was precisely Nehru. So you have to understand the bonds between Cubans and Indians, they are very strong.
Then on to Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, when Fidel Castro came visiting in the NAM conference in 1983, it was a famous hug by Fidel of Indira Gandhi, which was so much discussed. So we can understand the warmth between India and Cuba relations, which you are talking. Now it brings us to the second level of the question, that is that India and Cuba have how the political dialogue as a result of high-level visits between the two countries, how the political dialogue have taken place. I mean, it has evolved.
Yes.
That's what we would like to know.
The political dialogue has been taken place, I would say, had brought the possibility to know and to exchange different point of view of our internal matters, but also about international policy. For example, we at a political dialogue, the Cubans have a great attention to the work that India have made in multilateralism, because we think that in a world in where we live today, multilateralism should be the way to solve our problems. And here I would say India leaderships have always had that clear. And that is a point, a very important point in our political dialogue at high level. We also have other points that coincidence in our political dialogue. For example, the opinion to make reforms and extend the United Nations Security Council. We think that we have to extend this council and should be representative from different regions of the world.
Reflecting
not
the world,
only,
yeah.
yes, not only the mighties, also the developed country. And India, you have to imagine, India was more than 13,000 millions, 1,300 millions of people. They are not represented in the Security Council. It's a necessity.
Well, so that is the democratization of international politics further, and you support, and Cuba supports India on that count, we know. So now, Excellency, there is a very curious fact, and that is that in 1980s, India-Cuba trade stood at $300 million, a massive figure. Since then, it witnessed a steep fall to the level of $38 million, if I'm not wrong, and that is in 2015. So what are the reasons? I mean, what are the reasons behind this steep fall?
I think there are many reasons. I think there are many reasons. One of the reasons that brought that low level of exchange and commercial between our two countries, that was the issue of the debt. We had a debt that was caused because of our economic difficulties, because of our financial difficulty in that years. You have to take into account that Cuba is still a country where a blockade has been practiced very, very intensive. And in those years, we had a debt with India, and that was one of the reasons why the relations at the economic field were low. Second, we didn't have a financial mark for those relations, and we had to find it. Nobody gave us credit. Remember that in the blockade law, we could receive credit, we could not receive credit from the World Bank. We cannot receive credit from the International Currency Fund.
Yeah.
So there were only 2 or 3 countries that have given Cuba credit. So we needed trading, and that was one of the factors why these relations were too low.
Okay, so Excellency.
And perhaps as the last one,
Yeah.
perhaps, don't forget that the blockade policy of our neighbor includes the extraterritorial measures. That
Yes.
means that countries could be
Penalized.
because of that, and that is a fact.
Okay, so Excellency, now we'd like to have a short break, and after that we'll be back again with the Ambassador. Welcome again, Mr. Ambassador. Now tell us something about how do you propose to diversify the trade between the two countries now that once sanctions are being lifted or being rescheduled. So how do you try to diversify the trade between India and Cuba?
Well, we are thinking to diversify and potentially trade, but also the investment. Those two things. The investment, we have in Cuba a portfolio from business that includes more than 240 possibility of business and investment object in my country. And I think that this brings a possibility that Indian enterprises can go to Cuba and invest there. We are thinking that there are some areas, some branches where we are interested, and I think India is also interested, and that is, for example, in renewable energy.
Okay.
We want to, we have a problem in the country, and that is our main energy will be produced with gas and oil. Right now, almost more than 90%. So we want to extend the renewable energy producer in some years, so that we will be able to produce almost 30% of our energy based in renewable energy. And that is a possibility for the investment in Cuba. For example, other investment possibility is biotech and pharma industry, where we can complement each other, our economy. That is one point. The other point is trade, commerce.
Yeah.
We have till now a problem, and that is that our trading, our import and export of Indian and Cuban goods are being trading through third parties. And we have to change that. We have to do it directly. So we have to find...
So, okay, Excellency, how the bilateral agreements in the field of science, technology, sports, and training and other exchange programs, how these are working out between India and Cuba?
I say they begin now to move.
Okay.
Because we have several agreements with the government of India in culture, in sport. Now is discussing. Now we're discussing. Is still open an agreement in education, and we have centers, research centers in Cuba. They are working together with research center in India. For example, biotechnology.
Yeah.
That is starting step by step. In sport, for example, we have training. We have sent training personnel here to teach and to work together with Indian sport in boxing.
Yeah.
We are very, very interested to expand your experience in Cuba in hockey.
Okay. Then volleyball.
Yeah. So I think that the possibility to work this field the potential are there, and we are beginning.
Okay, Mr. Ambassador.
We're still now in a low level. We have to increase it.
So, Mr. Ambassador, there has been a sea of goodwill and robust cultural exchanges between India and Cuba. So much so that the image of Che Guevara or Fidel Castro himself has been a household name with the youths in India for a long time. So how do you think that more awareness about Cuba will lead to more tourism opportunities, more people-to-people contact between the two countries? How do you propose to do that?
Well, we are thinking first and to bring the information about our country to the people of India. We have to express our information through medias about Cuba, and there are some Indian agency that are interested now to promote Cuba tourism between the population of India. That is one point. The other point is that India is a mecca in film making.
Yeah.
You have Bollywood.
Bollywood.
The Indian film are very well seen in Cuba, and we have an experience with India filmmaker. They have run a film in Cuba, and I think that that is also a possibility that could increase interest to go to Cuba. We had the experience with a film about a Dick Tiger, I think that was the name, and I think that we can promote that.
Okay.
And another possibility is that with the increasing of international flights to Cuba from all over the world, it creates possibility that Indian citizens or tourists travel to Cuba. And I think those are the main parts of which we are thinking.
Recently, during 2013 and 15, our respective vice presidents went to Cuba and India each other.
Yes.
So now, do you think that it has led to a resurgence? I mean, the resurgence in India-Cuba relationship.
Yes, no doubt, no doubt. We should remember that, for example, when the vice president, Mr. Ansari, was in Cuba, he held some meeting with Fidel. He held meeting with Raúl Castro, and he also held meeting with Díaz-Canel, where different topics of our bilateral relations were discussed. But there is also a point, and that is that during that state, it was also discussed how could India waive the debt, the commercial debt that Cuba had, and it was waived. And that brings, of course, opportunity of credit to work into our relation, and that is very important of that visit.
Okay, so we'll take a short break, and after that we'll be once again with the ambassador.